This week, Kumar and Dana discuss the new book from Barry Windsor-Smith, Monsters, a book more than 30 years in the making. But first, if you're enjoying this podcast, support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. All patrons get our bi-weekly videos of 20th century TV trivia. More perks and bonus content at higher donation levels, including our ongoing full-length podcast on 1960s Spider-Man comics, and help us meet our goals to unlock the earliest episodes of our podcast and put them all back in the feed. Pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics.
This is Kumar.
This is Dana.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing the Comics. This is Kumar in Melbourne. Dana is in Fredericton in Canada. It's very rare on this show to do a book that is a new release.
Yeah.
But it's happening this time. Barry Windsor-Smith's Monsters. It's also a rare occurrence for there to be a new Barry Windsor-Smith book. Well, I mean, this is supposedly, according to the back cover copy, it's been in the works for, or in the press release, has been in the works for 35 years. Yep. 34 years of that probably spent on cross-hatching.
Definitely.
But it was originally conceived as a Hulk book, and the fingerprints of that are still there. The main character is called Bobby Bailey rather than Bruce Banner, and instead of General Ross, we've got Major Roth. And so imagine Weapon X, but starring the Hulk. And the Hulk is not Jekyll and Hyde, but he's Frankenstein instead. And that's basically, I think, the nutshell description of this really massive 400-page book. Now,
that's a beautiful description of it. I'm envious of that skill that you just exhibited.
I don't know. I think, but that's the way they were promoting it, sort of.
Okay.
They were promoting it about the Hulk thing. That's in all the press stuff. It says there was a Hulk, and then it was going to be a Captain America thing. And I think only about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I started seeing pages from it started appearing on Barry Windsor-Smith's website, right. And I started to get excited. It's like, oh, he's going to come out with this thing, and then it was like, he went away from Marvel, of course. So. And then he hasn't put out a new book in like 15 years or something.
Yeah.
So I suggested we do this episode, and normally what would happen is I was going to actually buy you a copy or something like that, and then before I had my copy, you had bought a copy, and I was like, uh-oh. Yeah. And then I read it, and then I was like even more like, oh, because it's, usually we have the summary at the end, but I'll put the summary right at the beginning, which is... Yep. It's epic, and it's also features a full page of a man shitting on a toilet, and it's brilliant, and it's frustrating, and it's super satisfying and super disappointing, and it's totally cliched and totally unpredictable. It's all those things, and I was like, I was reading I read it twice, and I was like, I can't recommend this to anybody, but I would probably read it again myself. And I think that is kind of summed up the swirling maelstrom of feelings I had reading it both times. It's kind of all over. It's almost like, when we did Weapon X, which is why I thought I thought we should do this episode together.
Yeah.
I love Weapon X, and I still love it to death. And I think that the length of it was amplified the brutality of Weapon X. It was very short.
Yeah.
Very intense.
Great paperback, yeah.
Yeah. And it was originally printed in Marvel Comics Presents, which is a cheap-ass anthology that was 99 cents. It was like it was a specially low-priced thing that had like 2 or 3 stories in it completely disposable. But yet somehow Weapon X came out of this thing. Somehow amping up to 450 pages or however long this is, it's almost like it got away from him sometimes.
Well, I think there's brutality in this, but it's not brutality that our main protagonist. I mean, he's not even our main protagonist.
No,
I think
that's another question.
Like Wolverine, the Wolverine stand-in in this book, Bobby Bailey. He's not really the victim of he's the main thing that happens to him in being subjected to this. What he's subjected to is not really the most brutal stuff that's in the book. It's more his background that's more brutal. Right. Now, I think you wanted to get into a little bit of a summary, and just before you do that, since you've kind of put all your cards, however contradictory they may be, on the table, I'll do the same. And say that I enter into this recording with a little bit of trepidation and a little bit of excitement, as anyone who's kind of tuning in to hear us fawn over Barry Windsor-Smith for an hour or so, or I might as well turn it off right now. I don't know. Maybe Kumar, you're going to do some fawning.
I am for sure.
I didn't deeply read any reviews of this book because I didn't want to be sort of influenced too heavily. But after I kind of formulated my opinion or my initial reaction to it, I just Googled, because I was like, am I way off on this book? And yeah, I am, because I didn't go deep, as I say, but just scanning through the first page of Google results of reviews, it's like 4.5 stars out of 5, 5 out of 5. The words masterpiece show up again and again and again. I'm afraid I do not agree with any of those. I'd say I'm pretty solidly going to give it a 2 out of 5.
Okay.
Just to sort of sum up my overall view, and well, I'm excited to get into some of the details of what issues I have with it.
Okay.
But yeah, as you said, maybe we should give a little overview for those of who haven't read it, but maybe want to have a bit of
and I think we have to spoil it heavily. So.
Yeah, probably.
And again, we don't usually review new releases. It's very unusual. Yeah. But we do because, part of the problem is, I think the ending is the worst thing about it. The final, maybe the 20 pages before the last 5 pages is really the weakest stuff in the whole book. So we've got to talk about that, because I think that's maybe what's preventing it from being a masterpiece. I think if he had cut those 15, 20 of those pages, it's really like we'll get to it, but okay, so this whole experiment happens, but it has Nazi origins. It has Nazi genetic human experimentation origins. And the whole book, there's a build-up, which we'll talk about all this stuff about, and we are slowly learning that something really bad happened at the end of the war. The Allied forces, the U.S. Army stumbled upon something really bad involving Nazi experimentation. We know this because Bobby gets experimented on right at the outset of the book, and we know that it is based on this thing. And then we find out more. It's got to be really bad. And we get to this really 2 sequences in a row, but there is the final one, the second of the 2, is when we finally get to see the U.S. team get into this Nazi laboratory and see what has been happening. And it is a tour de force, probably 50 pages of the most insane, intense, hands-shaking, trembling comics you've ever read. It's so full on. And then somehow after all this build-up, we get the hobbits come back to the Shire, and there's all this other shit going on there. It is like, why we have to do this too? And then we get some Rise of Skywalker stuff with some magic beings just who've never been there before suddenly appearing and doing all sorts of stuff and solving all these problems with a lot of Deus Ex Machina, and has really just really deflated the
Yeah.
amazing.
Although he does
that
set
sequence.
that up, though. He does set up the spiritual,
yeah.
not spirit, the mystical stuff is set up right from the beginning. It's teased, at least.
Yeah, I think it's more than. Yeah, it is more than teased, because there is a Luke Skywalker sort of teleportation that happens when Bobby Bailey is rescued. So we do get to see some astral projection sort of stuff happen.
Yeah.
I guess early on. I can't believe he does bring in a character, this TV station manager who has been dead, who you've never heard of before, comes back as a ghost.
Yeah.
You know, there's all this sort of and it's all a bit kind of messy. I think the last 5 pages is interesting. We'll talk about that. But all that stuff is kind of really cliched, and the whole. I mean, one of the major issues I had was right from the first 100 pages, even on my first reading, was the trope or the cliche of the magic Negroes. Right? It's like, why are half the black characters in this have these mystical powers, as if, and they're major characters, as if they can't participate in the story unless they have this going on for them. I think this is one of the big problems I kind of had with the book, and I had a couple of really long conversations with a friend of mine trying to get perspective on it, because I'm very worried. I'm not a professional critic or whatever, and so I'm really concerned about kind of coming on this podcast and wasting people's time with something that's amateur and kind of uninformed or whatever. And so when I have a reaction such as I did to this book, which is largely a political reaction, and I won't be mysterious about it, but how does this white guy justify making this character, Sergeant McFarland, black? Now, I have no problem with a writer writing someone that's different from themselves. I mean, and as I was kind of arguing with my friend, I said, well, that's what writers do. That's what actors do, and that's what writers do. You don't hire a white actor to play a black character. I hope not anyway. But aside from looks, that's what actors do. So writers, I think, have even more license, because all right, the part of the story, all of the story pretty much takes place in America, which is there's a mix of African and European and all different kinds of people. Although there are no Asians in Barry Windsor-Smith's America, which is fine. But. Well, it's set in. I can see that for the 1949 stuff. I think story-wise, that's understandable.
It's fine, but there are a lot of black characters or a lot of white characters. However, when you've got like a central character like Elias McFarland, I think you have to kind of question, all right, why Barry Windsor-Smith? Why did you make this character black? And if it's because of the trope that you mentioned, which don't believe I didn't think of that, but it seems so obvious now that you mention it, as you say, the magical Negro. But a horrible sort of blunder, I think. Now, if you started this book 35 years ago, absolutely, you'd expect to see that. But you're publishing it in 2021. I think maybe you need to rethink some of the characters. The one that got me, and we don't need to get into detail just yet, but it is the villain himself.
Absolutely,
I mean, he's the sissy villain. He's a homosexual.
Yeah, it has the same problem as Frank Herbert's Dune, in which the only homosexual character is the most vile, repulsive, disgusting human being you could possibly imagine. This guy is so bad. Now, there's his boyfriend, but he's also a Nazi.
Yep.
He's not quote-unquote as vile and repulsive as this guy, who cannot... He's a compulsive... This guy is a compulsive rapist. And so swear to God, at the end of he's almost a cartoon villain. Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say almost. He definitely is, because
he literally is.
He literally is, because in the first 10 pages, which is set in 1964 or whatever, there's a scene where he is berating this sergeant who's under him, or it's Major Roth, and he's like, beg me for forgiveness, and he means it literally. He says, no, do it, beg me. And so you're like, okay, this is funny and weird. Then we get to the end. He's literally he's chopped his own arm off, or he's done something. He's tied his arm off. It's been cut off. He's drugged himself silly, and he's wandering around. He's killed all these people, and he's like, he sees this guy, and he's like, I'm going to rape this guy, who's at the time, this U.S. soldier who he decides he's going to rape is eating human hands and has gone insane. And it is madness. Now, this whole scene I totally love, but 100% that is another thing that this Windsor-Smith has come in here, and let's call him the only homosexual character, is tied up with the villain role. Just like the mysticalness is tied. I mean, there's like a white soldier, I think, that also has mystic powers that gets possessed by Elias's daughter during the battle when Bobby Bailey's escaping, all that sort of stuff.
I don't know that character has mystical powers themselves, as you said. I mean,
well, he sort of does, because when he starts to go crazy, he becomes possessed by her, and then when the other soldier says, oh yeah, he always says he sees ghosts and stuff like that. There's like a line of dialogue that he's sensitive, enough. Let's say.
Okay, so aside from that trope, though, I mean, Windsor-Smith decides to depict the home life of African Americans in the 60s.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, how authentic is that? Is that just like a white guy deciding to show how? I mean, it's not that these are stories that shouldn't be told, but the question is, should Barry Windsor-Smith be trying to tell this story? And but I think. I don't think it's actually that complicated. I think I like going back to what you said, which is that it's this trope.
I think I think there's stuff about that I liked. I think that the way because he depicts, so Elias is he's a noble soldier. He's got some combat experience that we hear about that. They put a tail on him to follow him. We haven't explained any of the plot behind all this, but anyway, they put a tail on him to follow him, and they're worried that they won't be able to follow him because of all his combat experiences, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he's
so there's a scene where what happens is this kid, Bobby Bailey, who's a normal kid, but turns out to be homeless and disabled to a certain extent. He's got no family connections, comes in and wants to be into the recruitment office of the U.S. Army. Elias is the guy who he gets all his details. Okay, this cat has no families, and he finds out that he's a perfect candidate for this thing called Project Prometheus. Speaking of Frankenstein, which I mentioned earlier, Prometheus. Okay, anyway, so he recruits him into it. Now, then he doesn't hear back from Bobby, so he feels really guilty, and he's worried. Yeah. And he knows he's heard bad rumors about Project Prometheus, so he's like, oh my God, what have I done? So he becomes obsessed. He starts to go a little bit crazy. He starts living in his basement, cutting up.
The psychologist happens to be the main villain.
Right. Now, I'm not sure how that worked out, how his immediate superior was Friedrich, the former Nazi. Yep. But I'm not sure, but there's great moments in there where Friedrich, Africa, when he mentions Africa, if he mentions it, he mentioned it all in the first place, and then it's spelled with a K. And I like these really subtle microtransgressions, which are something you'd associate more with 1985 than 1965, I think. Where it's not really in your face. He's trying to act like he's Joe Blow American. Friedrich's trying to act like he's a normal, not racist guy, but he can't contain himself. And these things kind of slip out. And those kind of subtleties I really liked about it. And also the thing about him being a homosexual and a cartoon, all that stuff, is he's actually not who we think he is as well. Yeah. Friedrich, it's revealed, we get this whole other story about him, which really, when you go back and look at the beginning of the book, it really reveals a lot about why this project was such a mess, and the Hulk they tried to create is such a lumbering, mindless brute.
Yeah, but to get back onto the plot, just overarching plot summary, too. So yeah, Bobby gets recruited and gets put into this project and becomes a huge, like, monstrous, massive muscle. Escapes with Elias's help.
Yeah.
Into the wilderness of Ohio, I think,
Yeah.
and ends up going back to his childhood.
Yeah. No, so far, let me interrupt for a second. We think that, so the book opens, Bobby gets recruited. I'm like, okay, this book is going to be about Bobby Bailey. No. Now we get 100 pages of Elias McFarland and some cutting back and forth to this experimentation that's going on, which there are some horrific images in there. Amazing, horrific images.
Absolutely.
Times 10 of what we saw in the body horror that was Weapon X. Yeah, so we think it's going to be... But then they're like, oh, we're putting a tail on him. Okay, they're going to kill Elias. They're going to get back to Bobby. No. You get 100 pages of of Elias and his long-suffering wife. And there's a parallel there that we'll get to talking about. But his wife is like, "What? Why are you in the basement? None of this makes sense. Don't worry about that white boy. It doesn't matter. He's probably fine." And he's just like, no. And he claims he had this mystical encounter with some sort of angelic being 15 years ago. And she gave him a message to write which he wrote in a comic book.
I think it was more than 15. It was when he was a child.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So maybe he was 10 or... Oh, wait a second. No, but you know what? It doesn't add up. And I'll tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
None of the dates line up in this book, which is
do they not?
A super frustrating thing, but we'll get back to that. Remind me to get back to that. Anyway, he met this mystical being when he's a kid. She wrote something in his comic book. Now he's going through his pile of comics trying to find the message. Then we get to the escape. Okay, so he is in it for 100 pages, and then you think the whole book's going to be about him and Bobby escaping. No.
Yeah.
About page 75 or 100, that stops. All right, you may continue with your summary.
Oh, I was just going to flash forward a year, right where you said, they cut forward a year. They've been chasing the Hulk for a year, and Bobby Bailey, and...
Yeah, now you think it's going to be about the helicopter attacks and stuff.
No.
It's going to be Bobby, it's going to be the Hulk fighting the helicopters and the army. No.
No.
Right.
One of them crashes or something.
Yeah, by accident. They fly too low.
Yeah, it's like... Yep, they fly too low, and one of the helicopters that's chasing him crashes. They gas him and stuff, and the military, they get the call, and they all come in to catch him, and this other guy shows up, the local governor or whatever, Jack Powell, I think his name is, so he's kind of tagging along with the military, and they find, oh, well, why are all these pilots' bodies all like buried? And there's like they've got little headstones and stuff. Like, who did this?
Let me interrupt again. The scene where Bobby pulls the bodies out of the wreckage is fucking awesome. And there's the art. I mean, usually when artists do too much cross-hatching, it's because they're trying to hide something.
Yeah.
It is not the case with Barry Windsor-Smith. No. And I mean, the whole car chase where Elias goes to the installation to rescue Bobby, I've never seen anything like it in comics. It is
the stars this book gets is it's the craft of it.
It's so perfectly choreographed, and there's so many scenes, like that guy shitting, and the famous page a lot of reviews will mention is the masturbation scene. This woman masturbates her page. You blink and you'll miss it. It's awesome. All this stuff is... And the scene where he pulls the bodies out and the smoke and flames are coming off him. And it's just... it's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Anyway. Sorry, go on. So, So he goes back to his childhood home.
Yeah, that's right. He goes back to his childhood home, and we get the first layer of Inception. Flashback. So I'm not going to go through all these layers of flashback step by step, but basically there are about 5 layers of They're not all layers of flashbacks, actually, but that's kind of how it reads.
They're embedded, yes.
Like, he gets home, and we start to see his memories and flashbacks bleeding into the panel where he, as a monster, is sitting there at the dinner table with his childhood father. Should have mentioned, actually, the opening scene of the book is his father beating him so badly that he loses his eye. So his father got back from the war, was drunk and abusive due to, presumably what we would now call PTSD. But he's like screaming German and stuff.
In a kind of the font is like archaic German font. There's something really supernatural about the scene.
It's
very frightening. Very frightening. Again, for any comic, I don't remember being so like shooken up by.
It's a pretty incredible opening scene.
Yeah.
And then, like, cut forward 20 years or whatever, and Bobby's in the recruitment office. Anyway, back to the last part of the book. What do we get? Yeah, so Bobby Bailey gets home. We flash back to his father, Thomas Bailey, getting back from the war. We get a lot of his mother, Janet's diary, where she's struggling with like this cold, distant husband who's like very unkind to their son.
And she's constantly lying to herself about it and saying, "Oh, he'll get better. Obviously, the war was really bad." And everybody keeps saying, well, not everybody, but quite a few times, people say, "You were just a translator. Why? What would you have seen that would have freaked you out, or why are you always on about the war or going on about it?"
Yeah. Bobby's father was a translator in the war. Exactly. Yeah. It's not like he was a Marine or whatever.
Yeah.
So within these memories of Bobby, we get the second layer of Inception, which gives us the relationship of Jack Powell, the governor, who is masquerading as that's a little bit of a spoiler, masquerading as a sheriff, and befriends Bobby and his mom, kind of watching out for them while Tom Bailey is off in war. And then we get, I think, another. Oh no, it's not a flashback. So Janet goes to some event with Jack, and that's where she runs into young Elias McFarlane.
Yes,
in, like, 1948.
So those opening scenes take place in 1964. So it's only supposed to be 15 years ago.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, 60, 40. Yeah, exactly. Well, 16 years. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess he must have been a little older than like a 10-year-old kid or whatever.
Maybe he was 15. Let's say maybe
15,
he might have
15,
said how old he was, but there's some things. Okay, we're gonna have slight sidebar here, so I can talk about how annoyed I was by the dates. The dates are very important in this book because there's all these embedded flashbacks, which he's talked about. There's also the Thanksgiving Day massacre. So early on, Elias finds a newspaper cutout, or he's cut out an article about this Thanksgiving Day massacre, which involved Bobby Bailey. And he begins to suspect that Bobby's mother was the woman that he met when he was a kid. And that there's some mystical, fateful connection, destiny. There's some destiny between them. And this is an important theme because it's the only thing that explains kind of the end of the book. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. Unless this magic stuff comes in, it's going to fall. Anyway.
Yeah, that's very true. There has to be this supernatural thing, or else none of this really works on any level.
Yeah, because Tom. Tom. Okay, I'm going to sidebar again. I'll get back to the base. Yep. Tom Bailey is on the team. The dad is on the team that found this Nazi laboratory installation where this horrific stuff was going on.
Oh, okay. Inception level 4. Yep.
Yeah. So, and that's what we get at the very end. But what are the chances that the man who found that place was on one of the 5 guys that found that place? His son would be the one guy that ended up in the program of the same scientific experiment that the Nazis started, and he would be subjected to that. It does not add up. And Windsor-Smith doesn't say, no character says, it is destiny that you were brought here.
Yeah.
But you have to assume that's what it is, because they're always talking about the wheel of destiny turning and things being connected to each other. And I do think, I don't know if Windsor-Smith planned it, but I do think I think the force of that Nazi horror, the destruction of it, the waves of it are so powerful that it led to Tom's mental breakdown. It led to Tom beating his son losing his eye, his son ending up homeless and disabled, and his son ending up having no choice but to be recruited by the army, and then he would end up in this program. So I think it's almost, although it's a stupid coincidence, I think it's almost inevitable in a in a certain way. And I also think the last 5 pages, which I was going to say after the Hobbits get back, I do think the last 5 pages are really awesome. Although maybe also stupid, where so we've also had this Thanksgiving Day massacre teased out throughout the book. Finally, we get that right before the Nazi thing, the Nazi lab. That is also an amazing, harrowing sequence of the events that lead up to all these people shooting each other.
Yeah, just that. I mean, the whole character of Tom Bailey he's just so menacing and uncomfortable right off the page. Like it just, you feel the fear that Billy, or not Billy, that Bobby must be experiencing.
And there's really effective storytelling here. Yeah, he's really. I mean, he does tie this up. There's a moment where Tom points a gun at his own head. And Bobby and Janet are like, oh my God, what are you doing? Or Janet's like, stop, what are you doing? And he just kind of laughs it off. But he actually had a gun pointed to his head exact same way by Friedrich in the laboratory in that scene. So you see that all this stuff is not like he ended up this way for a reason. But anyway, so in the last 5 pages, we get this kind of these ghosts. These ghosts.
Everybody, all the dead people.
All the ghosts come together and finally have a happy Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah. But it's not just that. It's like the people that belong to get Jack Powell, who was actually committing, basically like they were having an affair, Janet Bailey and Jack Powell, although they, it's a 1940s.
It was chaste. They only had one kiss, but they were in love with each other, and they admitted that to each other, or he admitted it to her, and she admitted in her diary, at least.
So their ghosts sit down to have Thanksgiving dinner with Bobby Bailey's ghost. Like the right ghosts end up together. This is how we get our happy ending.
And it's kind of beautiful, and it's kind of a happy ending, but there's a moment during the actual Thanksgiving where Tom is yelling at Janet, as he does constantly, and she's another long-suffering wife, like Elias's wife, and she's like trying to appease him. She says all the right things. Actually, the dialogue in this book is awesome, and we haven't mentioned that it's 500 pages, but sometimes a conversation will go for 5 pages. There's such a long conversation about what a potato gun is. It's like 2 pages. It's wild.
Yeah.
Dialogue is really great. Anyway, he says, "What did you say?" And she said, "I didn't say anything." Well, it turns out she was speaking from her ghost future, because we get the snippets, but the way this page is laid out, in this beautiful final Thanksgiving moment, we get Tom's abusive, berating voice, caption after caption of him yelling at her, and all this grief. So I think he meant it to be a happy ending, but for me, it was like, again, that destructive force, that supernova that happened at the core of the book, thematically, has those waves are still affecting this happy Thanksgiving at the end. He couldn't even, Windsor-Smith might have tried to escape it, but even he couldn't escape what he had written in terms of the evil that had rung out through time and was still there even at this idyllic ghost dinner at the end. Let me get back to whatever you have to say about that, keep it in mind. The dates are wrong. So it starts out, it's in 1964.
Yeah.
Supposedly, that's what it says. It says 1964, but then we get a letter from Elias that he writes to his wife, and it's dated 1965. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, there's like a year of passage. I actually
No, but he wasn't down in the basement for a year. He was only down in the basement for several months, and they say that several times. You've been down in the basement for months. He hasn't been down there for a year or more, but he comes out on he's got this thing's dated Thanksgiving 65. Later on in the book, there's a moment where Janet is writing a letter about something that happened a week ago.
McFarlane's letter is dated 1965.
Yeah.
Well, he actually goes to break Bobby out on November 26th, 1964.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's
the dates are wrong. And then later there's a moment where Janet's writing a letter and she's like, this thing happened last week or yesterday, but according to the caption, it was the day before. Like, it's the opposite. It wasn't a week, and it was very confusing. And at the very end, we get this battle in 1964. It's dated 1964, between the final showdown where all the all the stuff's happening in the house with Jack Powell showing up there. Then
that's a mistake. Yeah, because it's 1965.
Right, but then we flash forward. We flash over to Elias's family, and they're having a happy Thanksgiving dinner. And it has to be the year later, but it says 1964. And I was reading this. I was very confused, before I figured out that these things were mistakes. That this book needs to be accurate about these things.
Oh, right. Yes, I know the flash. But yeah, it's page 337. Yeah, they go back to Elias's family, and that's when his daughter, the little girl who's got like the grandmother's spirit living in her or whatever, she's like sitting on her bed and she's acting like a little old mystic.
Yeah, and I'm like, is this supposed to be
dated 1964, November 26th?
Yeah, no.
And when Jack Powell finds Bobby in the previous section, it's 1965, November 25th.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the day after, but a year before.
Yeah.
So you're saying these are just mistakes.
Yeah.
Like, I would tend to.
And for
me,
because I read that in 1964, I was like, okay, this was the day he ran away, that Elias left home to go to the base to rescue Bobby. And I'm flipping through it, going, what?
Yeah.
I'm going, what is going on? How come they're having a happy Thanksgiving together? And I couldn't understand. And then I was like, finally, I pieced together that was they put the wrong date at the top.
Yeah, November 26, 1964 was the day that Elias left.
Yeah.
And did they fight before he left? Well, yeah, they wouldn't.
No, he was like, I'm going to go see my psychiatrist and stuff, and he lied to her.
Thanksgiving without him or whatever.
No, he said he actually told his son, get ready for Thanksgiving. He didn't realize it was, but he's like, okay, go back. And then they go out and buy the stuff, and it's just obviously not, anyway. That was yeah.
So it's the first printing. I mean, this is what we get for doing a book that came out in April.
I did think about that. And it was one of the things when you went out and bought it immediately. And then I read, I was like, oh no, Dana spent $50, $60, $70 on this thing.
What did I spend on this thing? It's not that bad. Like, for such a big, beautiful book.
That's true for a 500-page hardcover.
Yeah, 400.
All right. Sorry, you looked like you wanted to interrupt about something I was saying during the bit about Thanksgiving or something.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Or I may have, but I've forgotten what it was if I did.
Coming up, more appreciation and disappointment. And is Smith inextricably a superhero comics guy? Don't forget you can help to unlock classic early episodes of Deconstructing Comics, help me return all the old episodes to the podcast feed, and at the $4 level, get access to hours of additional full-length podcasts. At the $10 level, you can review the book of your choice with me here on this show. Support Deconstructing Comics and our other shows at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can send me a one-time donation via PayPal to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Greetings from Wayne Manor Memoirs, a podcast dedicated to exploring the Batman mythos.
Each episode, we research a character, story, contributor, or piece of pop culture related or adjacent to the Dark Knight,
and try to understand why these topics are important to the Bat mythos. I'm Joe.
I'm Kendall, and some of our favorite topics include the transformation of Mr. Zero into Mr. Freeze,
the early appearances of the Riddler,
Booster Gold,
Commandi,
Jim Aparo,
and many, many more. Check out Wayne Manor Memoirs every other Friday, wherever you download your podcasts.
And follow us at Wayne Manor Memoirs on Facebook or at W Memoirs on Twitter.
Until next time, Bat Fanatics, be brave
and stay bold. We
also have to reveal a major spoiler about Jack Powell at the end, which is revealed that he's a ghost. He's a ghost.
Well, yeah, but he dies right there. He gets hit by a missile right there. Yeah, he dies like a few pages before.
Oh.
Yeah, there's the military, like, they shoot a bazooka or something at the house, and he's blown back, and then he gets up and he's kind of holding his head, and he's like, "Oh man, like I'm all," and then he sees the editor, I think, and anyway, no, he just dies and becomes a ghost.
Oh, so he didn't die in 65.
No.
Okay, so but even so,
no, he didn't die because he's the cop that found.
Yeah.
Like around the family or whatever.
Okay.
Then he comes back later and he meets the military guys and he's like, yeah, I'm going to tag along.
Right.
You can't be just dropping gas and stuff in my community.
So but then Elias's ghost shows up and says to him, so Jack tries to talk to Bobby, and Elias at this stage says he can't see or hear you because you're dead.
Yeah.
But when he got hit by the missile and came into the house, Bobby caught him.
Yeah, because that was his body that flew back into the house, and he thought he was just stunned.
Okay.
Like Jack, he's kind of like, he thought he was just stunned.
Yeah,
but he's actually dead. Yeah, that's where he got killed right there.
By the way, I've got, you can see here I've got 6 pages of handwritten notes.
Good.
And when it gets to this stage, if you write more than 1 page of notes, they're useless because you can't find the thing you noted or remember what you wanted to say about something. But anyway.
Yeah, I actually started to write notes about this book, and I ended up all I did was I just wrote down everything that happened. So those are my notes. But it was actually valuable because I just have I've got the dates.
Right.
I didn't write everything, but I just kind of wrote down this is when Elias met Janet. And I think I can tell by the way you're talking about it that this book really affected you, and I think you're really excited about all the awesomeness that it contains.
I am, but I'm very disappointed by the ending. I'm disappointed by the mystical African Americans and the homosexual Nazi. But they're embedded in things that are amazing. That stupid conversation that Elias has about his meeting with the angelic lady is surrounded by amazing dialogue, amazing artwork, 10 pages of conversation between 2 people sitting on a porch, or not 10, maybe 5 or something, but that's impossible to pull off in comics, and he did it. And I'm just in awe of all that kind of stuff about it.
It's really readable.
Yeah.
It's really readable. I think the storytelling, as we talk about on this podcast all the time, is of course it's great. I mean, it's Barry Windsor-Smith. The guy's been making comics for 40 years or more. And to me, I found that there's no question that this is amazing craft.
Yeah.
But I got to the end and I was just like, what a cliche-ridden, unoriginal, mediocre book. The book is beautiful. It's gorgeous. Of course, the art's amazing. The storytelling's great. The pacing is great. Everything is great about it. But it's like the worst waste of time. Not waste of time. Like, why was this great book wasted on this terrible story? That's full of cliches and unoriginal ideas.
Yeah.
And when you said at the beginning of this podcast today that this originally started life as a Hulk book, I was like, yes, exactly. That explains every ounce of mediocrity that this book contains. It was originally supposed to be a Marvel book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm happy.
Yeah, and I mean, even that's a little. I mean, for me, I think the Hulk is actually Marvel's best concept. I think it's their purest, most perfect concept. And as I get older, year by year, I love the Hulk as an idea more and more. Not necessarily Hulk comics, but the Hulk. And that Ang Lee movie, which is widely derided, there's a moment in there where the Hulk goes and sits in a field and listens to the birds and watches the grass kind of blow in the breeze, and he's just at perfect peace. And I was like, I fucking understand this character and this movie so perfectly. He just wants to be alone and listen to nature and sit in a field. And I was like, wow, this is the best thing Marvel's got. And they're not really knowing what to do with it. Although apparently the current book, Immortal Hulk, is really good, but that's besides the point. But for me, when we got to this and I opened it up and it's like, oh, it's not, he's turned it into Frankenstein instead, that was actually a letdown as well for me a little bit.
Yeah.
That they went with the Captain America thing where they were trying to make a super soldier. When there was the reveal that there were like Nazis in it. Yeah.
that was just like, oh, really?
Well, that's
really?
that's a cliche. Yeah, that's another cliche. But my thing about it is like, especially that final sequence, he's amped that cliche up to a level which no one has amped it up to.
Sure.
That I know of. I don't know.
Except the actual Nazis.
Yeah, except I don't know if they went to this. The amount of murder and mutilation and fights, every time a fight stops, another one starts. And then even within that scene, there's a flashback to how, because when they show up, all the Nazis are dead, except for Friedrich, whose arm's been cut off. Then we get a flashback to them. There's a goddamn shovel fight in this scene where his... You know, and it's just, and we learn all this stuff that Friedrich's not actually a scientist. He's just this probably low-ranking... Actually, the commander doesn't even know his name. I don't know what he's doing there. He's like a clerk, maybe. And he was supposed to be copying these files, and he didn't copy the files, and we don't know what he was doing at nights when he was supposed to be copying the files. And all the originals have been burned. And all this stuff, we can guess.
Hans.
Well, Hans wasn't there. He's like, what were you doing here all those nights? So I think he's maybe been having sex with these mutilated bodies that they've been experimenting on. Who knows? It's possible. In this book, don't rule it out. My thing is, yes, that's a cliche, but it's amped way up. And yes, the mystical black people are a cliche, but it's in 10 pages. You know, it's in these 5 pages conversations that are really well written. And I don't know, like I said, I'm really torn about it. In a sense, I really love the way he's done it. Was it worth doing in the first place? I don't know. It's amazing to me that after 100 pages, Elias is dead. So the guy you thought was going to be the main character, and I was like, wait, there's 400 more pages? And then actually the book is really about Janet, because she's probably in 300 pages of it.
It's amazing how substantial that section of the book is. You get this thing. It's like, oh, this is going to be about Bobby Bailey. Oh no, it's going to be about Elias. Oh no, and then it's kind of. I think that there's probably like a 150 page really amazing. There is a 150 page masterpiece in this book.
Yes.
There is not a 365 page masterpiece. Which is what it is or whatever, but
I mean, I appreciated the shitting page and the conversation about the potato gun.
I think those things are what need to be kept in.
Okay.
There's a lot. It's like other stuff that needs to be cut. Like all of the plot needs to be thrown out.
But I mean, even like the first time I read it, I remember Friedrich, when he gets, so he has a whole conversation as Elias. The first time we meet him, he's giving Elias psychological advice or psychiatric advice, and he says, take some time off, blah blah blah. Then he calls up his lackey Roth on the phone, and we see that he's got a mechanical arm. Now I forgot that detail. Read the ending, his arm gets cut off. I forgot all about it. I didn't draw this connection, and then the second time I was like, oh, that's arm. That's from when his arm got cut off by the shovel. And
I think he's missing an eye as well. Which
it's like a major. These are major things. And I didn't even pick them up until second reading. And like I said, I got 6 pages of notes, and there's still stuff that I'm like, oh, what did I miss? Like the first time I read it, I didn't even connect that Jack Powell. When the cop Jack Powell showed up, I was like, oh, that name sounds familiar from earlier in this book somewhere. And I didn't piece together that he was the governor until he finally said I lied that I was the governor and all that kind of stuff. And that kind of stuff happened. And even the cliche about about them doing the Captain America experiment on him is kind of, there's these 2 guys working at the lab that hate taking orders from the higher ups, and one of the sickest scenes in the book, but amazing, is they say make him. They give the orders to make Bailey look patriotic, and they stick flags in his ears and stuff. And it's all of this. None of this stuff happens in. I've never seen any of this before.
In some ways it's quite an incredibly effective, or I should say, affecting portrayal of the monstrosity of humans. Which. Undoubtedly is the central theme of the book. It's not just Bobby who's a monster. I mean, Bobby's a literal monster but inside is just a damaged boy. Thomas Bailey is a, the metaphor is so obvious, it's not even worth talking
the
about.
title is terrible. It's so on the nose. Monsters. Yeah. I didn't even open page 1 and I knew.
Yeah.
Even though I was looking forward to it, I was like, oh, that title is... Come on.
Yeah. You know what this is going to be.
Yeah. But I mean, again... you know what it's going to be, but you didn't know it was going to be that full on about it. There's a scene where Roth... The Roth is trying to get to the house. They're driving through snow. By the way, the snow looks amazing. And these pages of it snowing, I couldn't believe it. Anyway, they're driving in their Jeep, trying to get to the house. He's like, pour on the gas. The driver's like, he's driving close to this ditch. And maybe deliberately, because he's kind of on Bobby's side, this driver. Yeah, the Jeep turns over. The Roth and the driver are thrown from the Jeep, but the driver's under the Jeep. Roth pushes... When he gets out, he's so angry, he presses the Jeep down on top of the guy.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is crazy level.
Yeah.
Imagine being that angry that you press the Jeep down onto this guy that's trapped under it.
Yeah.
Sure, it's called Monsters. It's very obvious that, the American military has taken up this Nazi experimentation. That is, from page 1, I was like, this is crazy. This is a level of evil and irresponsibility that I cannot believe. But that thing, it's amped up so high that I was just carried through the book partially in disbelief.
Mm-hmm. Well, this one goes to 11.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And I think that's kind of the selling point of it, I think. Yes, I think a lot of... I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but sometimes when artists go off and write a comic and they try to make it really long, it doesn't work. And I think in this case the characters and the story got away from him, and I think he followed those threads and he just ended up where he ended up, and it turned out the book ended up being about Janet because she took it over herself, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And my edition, I know there's 2 editions. The UK edition is from Jonathan Cape. This is a major book publisher, and that's why if you Google it, you've got all those positive reviews, because anytime a prestige book, a comic comes out from a publisher that doesn't normally publish comics, the mainstream critics press tend to give it positive reviews without really understanding comics, like they're book readers, and they come in and they think, oh, this is what a good comic must be, kind of thing. And I think
that some of the reviews I saw were from comics websites, actually, but it's possible that some of them were also, as you say, from people who don't normally review comics. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but
it's the sort of book that I think people could get fooled by, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe again I'm being too harsh on it, because I think it does take it to 11, and it does. Again, the craft and skill of Barry Windsor-Smith cannot be denied. But I just don't think I don't think you end up with a really worthwhile book, though.
Yeah. I think some of the positives are that the craft is at 11 and not the story. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Despite what I said before, like for example, when Bobby Bailey escaped, I was like, okay, this is going to be about the adventures of McFarlane and Bailey trying to run from the government. And then it was like, oh no, McFarlane's dead. And I thought it's going to be about, okay, then we get the helicopters, like, okay, it's going to be the Hulk fighting the army. Great.
Right.
No, I was expecting the cliche and looking forward to the cliche. And even at the end, the helicopters show up and there's no battle with the army like that. It's the ghosts that show up and sort things out. And, the masturbation scene where you just kind of, the camera pans away to the window.
Yeah.
It is at 11, but it's at 11 at the level of cross-hatching he's done and the amount of care he's put into the scene where the woman, she's lying flat on her back on the bed and her arm you have to look at the panel. I didn't even pick it up in the second reading. Her arm goes to her crotch, but you're looking at the shot from behind her head through the window, so you don't see it.
Yeah.
And then it pans away, and then you see the curtains fluttering through the window. I mean, that is an 11 level of craft, but it's not like what you would see. Well, I don't know what masturbation scenes look like in a Marvel comic, but if they exist,
nobody does.
But they don't look like that. So I mean, I don't. What I'm trying to. How do I define my feelings about it? I'm torn between, let's say, appreciation and a feeling of being overwhelmed, and an intellectual realization that there's nothing new going on here at the what should I call it, on the story, on the plot level. So I wouldn't go as low as 2. I mean, but the thing is, if you love Barry Windsor-Smith's art, there is Weapon X and there is Conan. His Conan stuff is awesome. Look for Red Nails. That's like 30 pages or 60 pages of just amazingness.
That short-lived superhero family book.
Yeah, Storyteller. Wow, yeah, that was great.
Yeah, that was a cool book.
Yeah, really amazing stuff. But he is really a superhero industry guy. And he worked in that. I mean, his X-Men stuff is awesome. And
I mean, maybe that's something that he can't really get away from.
It's almost like Ozymandias's plot to save the world is a very comic booky plot, but he's a comic book villain. And I feel like Barry Windsor-Smith was kind of a comic book villain who can only think in comic book ways to a certain extent. It's like it has to be Nazi experimentation or whatever.
I think he's, maybe in a way that, Barry Windsor-Smith has tried. I mean, he had this dream to create this, profound book about trauma and human monstrosity.
Yeah.
And, maybe he's just kind of limited, as terrible as that is to say, he's kind of limited by what he does.
Yes.
And what you end up getting is something that reads kind of like a superhero book, but is trying really hard to not just be about that, but you can't get away from those
and even
days.
I mean, even Peter Allen David in the 80s introduced the abuse storyline to the Hulk. So that's been there since like 87, 88, when he came up with this whole plot about how Bruce Banner had been abused as a child, and that was part of the whole Hulk thing. So, and I don't know if Windsor-Smith was aware of that or not. He might not have been, because he'd been so busy cross-hatching and not looking up from his work desk. I can't give it a star rating, but again, I can't, like I said at the very top, I can't recommend it to I can't say you should read this book because it's really harrowing. But I'm probably gonna end up reading it again at some stage. So, and again, if it was,
I've got the book, so I'm reading it again.
Yeah. If it wasn't for that last 15 pages, especially before the final, if he somehow kept in the Ghost Thanksgiving with all the negative word balloons around it, I would give it a star rating, and I think it would be pretty high, like 3.5 out of 5 or something like that.
Yeah. I don't think I could recommend it either, but I wouldn't not recommend it because it's harrowing. I would not recommend it because I've got a couple shelves of books behind me, that I would recommend, like Black Hole by. I see your Black Hole behind you too.
Yeah.
Which I think we talked about on this podcast.
Yes, we did.
I'd just be like, oh, okay, read this instead. Don't read Monster. Not that they're the same, but I guess they probably do have similar themes. No, I just think Black Hole is interesting and kind of unique and unusual, and Monsters is just big and kind of amazing. Like a Jerry Bruckheimer film.
Yeah. I was discussing this with someone a week ago who'd never heard of Barry Windsor-Smith. He said, "What are you reading?" I said, "I'm reading this book, Monsters, for the podcast." I said, "Have you ever heard of Barry Windsor-Smith?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, you should." First thing out of my mouth was, "Oh, you got to read Weapon X." First thing out of my mouth was not, "Oh, you got to read Monsters."
No.
And then he read Weapon X. He's like, "Yeah, I read it. It was pretty good." He said, "I'm going to read Monsters next." I was like, "Oh, well, it's deeply flawed, but it's amazing."
How about Black Hole?
I haven't heard back from him yet. How about Black Hole? Yeah, that was probably my next recommendation. But okay, any. I mean, again, I can't believe we summed this up in an hour somehow. But a lot of it is, it's very. I mean, Janet's a great character.
She is.
That's almost
there's a question. There's some powerful moments too. I mean, there's some great delivery of scenes and moments.
Oh my God, the scene where she kisses him in the rain and the rain is pouring down, and I mean, how do you draw that? How do you even approach that? And it's astonishing.
It's an entirely black and white book as well. I think.
We have not mentioned that. It's all in black and white, which is why there's a scene where they're eating Oreos, and it's so. The cross-edge, it's so dark and gloomy, and the rendering of this moment is insane. So deeply frustrating. I don't know. Did I already say any? Do you have any last thoughts about it?
Yeah, you did. You did, and I think we've covered it. Yeah, it definitely looks good on the bookshelf, though. It's nice.
It is a really, beautifully presented book with all the dates wrong because somehow somebody didn't check them. And
next,
and it's you know what? Because Weapon X and X-Men and Conan the Barbarian are all in color. This is in black and white. I'm going to say you should read this as well.
Just because
it's in black and white, and he has to approach his control of light, like we're talking about in the rain, his control of light and dark is amazing. And I'd say maybe at least flip through it if it's not vacuum sealed on your comic book comic book store's bookshelf.
See if your local library has it. Support your local library.
Yes. Check the library. At least look at it because it is. Wow, something else on that level at least.
Incredible book, yeah. Especially if you're like an artist yourself and you can appreciate what he's doing, because, it's incredible in that way for sure.
Yeah.
Monsters is published by Fantagraphics. Thanks for listening. Thanks also to J.B. Anderton for our theme song, and thanks to our patrons for their support. Join them at patreon.com/deconcomics. Next week, Adam joins me for a Critiquing Comics episode featuring Amazing Grace by Shane Berryhill and Mike Salter. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.